So, welcome to the very last panel. I'm really glad to receive and welcome again the amazing and really bright panelists today and moderators. The next panel is titled Institution as Communities, and it will gather a strong personality from very different kind of scale of institution, some in Mexico, some in Estonia, some in Singapore soon, I've gathered all the participants for the last panel around this idea of how institutions can be communities and can form communities, for the simple reason that each of the participants are just bringing a wealth of experience navigating institutional roles, embracing nomadic practices, while forging very new paths and creating alternative narrative. And this panel will focus on how can we build unique communities of thought, influences, people, artists, through the curatorial work and leadership, I think. We will also explore various strategies for balancing engagement with local audience and collaborators while working on a global scale. And I want you also to pay attention to a very specific aspect that all the different institutions that we will perhaps discover today are from different kind of places within the art ecosystem. They are functioning differently with different kind of funding. Some are private, some are public, some are independent, some are foundation. And I really wanted to break the idea of hierarchy between institutions, but rather to think how all these institutions can communicate, can be complementary, and maybe think that a hierarchy between institutions is no longer relevant. But I would just give my microphone to Avase. Thank you so much for moderating this panel, and I will let you continue. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for everyone being here on a Saturday at 4 p.m. There is candy in the front, says you need some sugar. Thank you, Anaïs, for inviting me, and through that invitation, learning about some new cultural projects. A couple of the colleagues I knew from before, but two of the colleagues are completely new to me, so that's always really exciting. I am an American of Iranian heritage who has made Mexico her home for the last 21 years nearly. Even though I've been abroad running museums, I have not been able to disengage from Mexico. It's in my heart. And I come from an institutional background, so I'm not going to be speaking so much about my projects, but maybe through my questions, bring a little bit of perspective, trying to build communities in every one of the institutions that I've been at. So on the website, there are extensive bios on our esteemed colleagues, so I'll just be very brief so that it allows for more time for us to discuss. So we're going to start with you, Joe, who is an independent curator and writer currently based in Mexico City and runs Vernacular Institute, which was based in Taipei, but she's going to talk about a couple different projects.
Thank you, Abase, and thank you so much for Anaïs for your sincere invitation. And go this direction. Oh no. So, my name is Jo Ying Pan. I am a Taiwanese independent curator and currently directing at Vernacular Institute. The space itself is a not-for-profit organization. It dedicates to the most of my central narrative of the curatorial direction, which I always inviting and developing this kind of international, regional exchange and bridging through the different projects. So vernacular, maybe I can start talking about how it actually becoming and located in Mexico. It was actually started from, funded by Kit Hammonds in London and between Mexico City and Taipei, and in the end of 2014. And that time vernacular as its initial stage, it had no physical space, but as a mobile project, kind of like a circulating in the independent art book fair, different type of the editorial activities and library programs in collaborating with a different institution. And in 2017, since I personally located to Mexico City, and I started taking this position as a director and running vernacular in the city here. And the first stage in Mexico City, I started running vernacular in the living room in the Escandon house. And it was dedicated with a lot of like residency program with Asian artists. And I invited artists to have like an exchange project to collaborating and doing the field research during their stay in Mexico. And at the moment, after the pandemic, vernacular itself is right now located in the neighborhood of Santa Maria la Ribera. And in Santa Maria la Ribera, it actually has quite a lively environment with many art studio there, and also it's enriched with its artist community. And since vernacular based in the Santa Maria la Ribera, it has a very privilege with how the building gives itself as a very a lot of freedom to do different kind of activity. Because as I mentioned about, I personally started vernacular from the living room, and it was not being able to separate this project with the personal life and the professional field of the work. But somehow it also reflecting with how I actually dedicated and my working relationship with this kind of type of the curation, and also the collaboration with artists. And at the moment in the house in Santa Maria, vernacular has its own separated exhibition activity space. And since 2021 until so far, it has been regularly programmed, maybe like 4 to 6 projects every year. And it depends on the project, it depends on its own duration. And I think most of the project I will probably, vernacular being recognized, and I will also going to address is the 3 types of the focus. First is the performance art. I have been working with including the live art and choreography works. And secondly is the artist make film and the video art, which not just presenting, also I involved with commissioning artists to produce the new films locally in Mexico. And the third is probably the most valuable thing I want to extend more is the research project. I'm trying to involve with more like environmental and eco crisis subject about this kind of the subject. And in vernacular, today, I think I will taking an example, just like one project to talk about is a Cafe de Chino. Cafe de Chino is actually started from 2022 when I invited a Taiwanese dual artist. Their name is Working Hard, to come to Mexico City to do a field research. And following by the field research, they realized a site-specific installation. And this field research subject, we started a year ago to talk about what it should be. Okay, and the artist started to think about this kind of Chinese immigrant in the early 20th centuries. And through our archival research, we found a film called Cappuccino. And from this, we started doing the field research about looking for the disappearing, but still living Cappuccino in the Centro area. Is a historical center in Mexico City. And the project itself involved a lot with the interview and also with the archival and object research. And after that, by end of the project, it was finalized as a film set installation to actually rebuild the cafe in the space. And in this photo, I'm really sorry about the isolation of the photo. The photo is a size-specific installation. You could see a vernacular is in the middle room between the two rooms. And this is kind of creating a backstage of the filming, which the center of this filming scene is the Cappuccino City. And in this space, artists wanted to address, which for the central narrative of this project is to talk about the collective memory. And this kind of collective memory, we kind of try to use the rebuilding film set. And this rebuilding film set is actually meant to have absent of the persons in the space. So audience and kind of taking a distance to look at the installation, it is a way to actually questioning what is the memory and the imagination of this Chinese immigrant in the Mexico society. Yeah. So maybe I can reflect into more questions from Abase to talk more developing of the project details.
Yes, sorry. Thank you, Joe. So talking about Cafecino and vernacular, they foster very experimental collaborations. And so maybe going back to the premise of institution as a community, how do these fluid artist-led initiatives challenge traditional institutional models, and what does that teach us about sustainability in community-driven art spaces in your practice within this community?
Well, I think the community this trend is a very, very adept in this how you give its definition based on your institutional principle and your also the curatorial strategy. And in most of my practice, which taken from the vernacular programs, I would say I normally working with artists, and both of curator and artists, we working with community. But the community with this working is kind of like approach through the artistic practice and also through the project process. So in terms of the community, maybe it's very different from what we think about the general community and the artist community. Cappuccino is one of the most special example, probably from the vernacular project, which it was really very much reached. The general public vernacular probably was not really able to reach in most of the time, because this kind of Chinese immigrant family in Mexico City, it has its own like enclosed community. You don't really find them unless you go through like friends, or you're actually spending time at a cafe talking with them through weeks and months. And that was the first time I realized like to actually take in the project into the locality and actually to start this kind of dialogue, which has very directing with the local community. But then I also find the other thing, which is, I think 3 years ago when 2022, we first time presenting Cappuccino at Vernacular and Mexico City. It was a very different, it has a visible gap of the communication. When you actually wanted to talk about the art language to interpret what cappuccino, this kind of historical meaning and the social culture, the hybrid social culture. But then what kind of language you could use when you actually communicate with art community or artistic community or with the general public. And that was the first time I kind of realized I actually will have to, and of course for the artist it's a very field research rich experiences. But as a curator, to standing in the front line for communicating with the public, I found there are a lot of challenges when we actually how to shape our tool as a language to communicate with a community about this kind of artistic project and what the project actually means and how we use art to respond to our present day social political issues.
Thank you so much, and we'll expand on that when we all talk later. So Karen, you're going to talk about both your projects, the Estonian Contemporary Art Development Center and the creation of Kai.
Yes, and first of all, thank you Abase and thank you Anaïs for this week, and also huge thanks to our hosts. Mexican hospitality is next level. I have been taking notes. So I'm going to try and tell a story of a nomadic organization that was launched in New York City that found its home in a former submarine factory in Tallinn, Estonia, in 3 images in 10 minutes. I may not succeed, but I'm going to try. So first, just a few keywords about myself. I'm originally from Estonia, and I've lived in New York City for 10 plus years. My community building period in New York involved positions like gallery manager at Swiss Institute, director of an international artist residency, and in my free time I was running a couch residency at our loft in Greenpoint, and there was also an apartment gallery. So that was my professional network building period, very intense. So fast forward 2012. I hadn't been in Estonia at that point for several years, and I really didn't see my professional future connected to my birth country at that point. But something interesting was brewing. So Estonia had joined European Union in 2004, and in early 2010s, there were a number of large grants that became available, first for agriculture and tourism and small businesses, but there was a pilot project to support art and culture. And so this was something that had very unusual restrictions, like you had to invest the money first and then get reimbursed later. Also no infrastructure or any kind of building costs were allowed. So quite a few restrictions, but still even bigger opportunities. Most importantly, I would be in a position to create all the programs from scratch. I could see the shortcomings of this agenda early on, but this was kind of also a once-in-a-generation opportunity that would have a long-term impact for Estonian contemporary culture. So, long story short, I became the founding director of Estonian Contemporary Art Development Center. My only condition was that I wanted to stay in New York City. So, the center was launched at my friend's loft in May 2012 with Estonian Minister of Culture present, and it may sound a bit odd for bigger countries, but in Estonia there's just 1.3 million people, so to have a minister at somebody's loft with a major government backing. I mean, it was big news in Estonia, but also at the same time, it felt completely normal, because Estonia is known as the first digital nation, and their whole industry is being changed by only the vision of like handful of people. So why not the arts, right? So I left my beloved job at the international presidency and committed myself to this newly launched center. And what you see in this first image kind of sums up our first 5 to 7 years. We had no building. We wrapped ourselves in a carpet and made home in the different cities around the world. The image on your right is Escenas exhibition in London. And the image on the left is Estonian Pavilion at Performa Biennial in 2017. And this is Chris Lemsalu and Kip Malone in a performance called Going Going. So coming back to the grant, the government grant had a certain restriction. So what I devoted my time mostly to was building exactly these global networks and partnerships. So what did we do? There were, I mean, I'm only a little bit joking when I say that we became a travel agency / event planning / matchmaking, organizational matchmaking company. And it was a very intense, very, very fun period. So during our nomadic years, so one collaboration really stood out, and I'm coming back to Performa here. Founder Rosalie Goldberg is known globally for her visionary work, and what they do is really nothing short of groundbreaking. So when I noticed that they launched the Pavilion Without Walls program, with Norway being the first focus country, I really took notice, and I did two things. I reached out to Ingrid Moe to hear how her experience was. She was the person behind the Norwegian Pavilion. If there ever was one amazing cultural attaché for one country, that is Ingrid. And then next I wrote to Rosalie Goldberg and I asked, in short, what an amazing platform, and what about Estonian Pavilion? And so next thing I know, I'm in a meeting with Isa Nicol, their managing director, and Estonian Pavilion took place in 2017 with 3 new artist commissions from Anu Vahtra, Chris Lemsalu, and Flo Kasearu. And Isa Nicol and Maike Goenberg were curators. So these 3 commissions were really amazing, out of the box, completely phenomenal. And the collaboration continued. So in 2023, Isa and I collaborated on a Baltic Fellowship program. So 3 emerging curators from Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania worked with the Performa team. And also there was another new artistic commission by Chris Lemsalu and Kitty Florentine. So, 2 minutes, exactly. So, let's go to the next image. Fast forward to 2017, the year that the Estonian Pavilion launched. I think we made a bit of news in Estonia with the collaboration, and the developer reached out and asked if we would like to get a home in Estonia. And so this is a very unique location and also a very unique building in Tallinn. It's right by the sea. It's a former submarine factory. The building, the photo on your left is how it was, the ruin. And the building on the right is, I believe, Last Christmas, with the tree and not many boats in the sea, but you can almost see Finland. So the nomadic organization found a home, and although it was a difficult decision, it was the right one. Looking back, we we found a new audience, and we were able to work with artists in a completely new, in-depth way. So in addition to exhibition space, we also have a co-working office, international residency, and the only cinema in Northern Town. And I just want to wrap up with 2 upcoming projects at Kai. Afterglow by Anna-Maria Häkkinen is a performer commission from 2023. We're so excited to have the European premiere at Kai in 2 weeks with the whole original cast of 11 dancers from New York in Tallinn. And this is going to Kiasma next, and this was commissioned for the Finnish pavilion. And so what I learned from the Norwegians, I passed on to the Finns and Lithuanians, who will have their own pavilion later this year as part of Performa. And the image on your left, this is the artist Flo Casero at her house museum in Tallinn. She was also one of the artists at the Estonian Pavilion in 2017. And we're showing her new work in March of this year, and the curator is Kari Konti. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So that's that's a spectacular center. If you're going to have a center, that's I think our aspiration.
Thank you.
So your initiatives began as nomadic initiatives, and now with Kai, now you have a 5 and a 10-year-old. Basically, you have 2, just young child and about to have an adolescent. And so you've navigated the transition from flexible project-based model to an established institution operating between 2 countries. How do you maintain the agility and experimental spirit of a nomadic organization while building the long-term sustainability and infrastructure of an institution? Which is not necessarily a bad word. We should say that. Institution can be a good model.
Exactly, and institutions really are people. But what a great question, because I really thought about that a lot in the transition period from being nomads to settling down. Because I have to tell you, before 2017, I had no interest in devoting 40% of my time to fundraising to keep the lights on in the building. But I think because we were nomad first who chose to settle down, we had really strong relationships, partners, we already had an audience. So the decision was to settle down and have a home and also have a home audience. And ultimately, we looked at building as a tool which would expand our vision and just allow us to keep the work going, because the funding was going to go away at some point, the European funding that I was mentioning earlier. And I had to ask myself, so what's going to happen in the next 5-10 years? How am I going to be able to leave the organization in a really good position for the next generation? I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and we'll continue. Now, thanks. So I've very excited to another institution that I really did not know. So I switch it to you, Xiaoyu, and you're a Shanghai-born and New York-based writer and curator, and currently the artistic director of the Tanoto Foundation in Singapore. And this is a new journey. You also are an institutional colleague from before, but you're now embarking on this new journey. So with that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Abase, and thank you, Anaïs, who I think went out for a little break, and also our host for having me and us here. It's been an absolutely pleasant 5 days, and also really happy to be back in Mexico City after 10 years. So as Abase mentioned, that I just started a new job as an artistic director for this newly founded foundation called Tanoto Art Foundation, based in Singapore. I guess when we were tasked to think about this idea of community, for me also, maybe I'll rewind and go back and thinking a little bit about where I come from professionally wise. And I think I had worked in large museums, so it's also, when we talk about institutions, there's so many different kinds of institutions of different scales, different budget, this different historical trajectory. And I had spent almost 10 years of my career in large mega institutions. And towards the 2023, I had a really hard time in my last job in really figuring out what my community is. And why I'm doing the work I'm doing, for who. That actually lead to a very kind of rewarding, transformative, self-reflective time where I decided to resign from a very prestigious position in the museum, and then returned to New York and started independent work as a writer and independent curator. And during this time, I reflected in terms of, again, like what my community is and why I'm doing the work as a curator. Should I venture into other fields or maybe try something different? So all that. Also, in the same time, I don't think I haven't figured out an answer yet, but this is a step of sort of leading to where I really gravitate towards working closely with artists and on the very ground, and also supporting emergent and mid-career artists, and also really focusing on production. And that's something I come to kind of realize this is part of what I feel affinity with, and also where I can maybe be the most useful and fulfilled. So this lead to this opportunity really kind of also starting something new with this entrepreneur spirit. Like, we're really a startup. We have a team of 3 people at the moment. I'm being the one working remotely, and we have an amazing curator from Singapore based there. And then we also have a communications manager who does everything. We also have a part-time project manager, which is a huge help in facilitating everything. But I wanted to also just give a little bit of introduction of TAF. That's what we call. It's a privately funded foundation, meaning that we don't need to do fundraising, which is certainly a bless, but also it comes with disadvantage, which if we have time, we can get into. Its ambition is to have a Southeast Asian perspective while creating a global narrative of contemporary art. There is a collection, and the foundation is also planning a private museum. And also, just a little bit about Singapore. I'm not sure if the audience are familiar with, because when we say Singapore, everybody think about the mega metropolis with, high-rise buildings and humid tropical weather and very, very post-nature, air-conditioned and all that. But Singapore actually is a very, very young country. This year, it's going to be 60 years old. From its independence of British colonial, it was a former British colonial region, and for almost over 100 years, actually, from 1819 to 1942. Currently, it has 4 major ethnicities occupying the country. It's Chinese, Malay, Indonesian, and also expats. So there are 4 respective official language of the country. It's a very culturally interesting place, but also because of its wealth, it kind of played and assumed the role to connect to the region in Southeast Asia. A lot of cultural and arts activities featuring artists from Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, etc. And also for the foundation, we really wanted to create the South to South Alliance to connect the so-called Global South, even though the term now is very problematic and we wanted to popularize it. And one of our interests is really to explore these previously perhaps unseen connections. For example, I just wanted to give one example of kind of engagement and collaboration we wanted to do is with the Asian diaspora communities in Brazil. Particularly, there's the Institute Tamayo Auditorium. You might be familiar with a brilliant Japanese Brazilian modernist artist who had passed away, but was very important and instrumental in Brazilian abstractism and minimalism. So these are the histories that we hope to facilitate also through the work at the foundation. Yeah, I don't know if I have time to, I have time. Okay, so the other thing I'm thinking about community is right around the same time I was embarking this new journey, working with this private foundation, seemingly quite privileged as we were talking about funding. I decided that I would love to resurrect and revive a organization, long-running independent art space, one of the most important, you would argue, in New York City, called Art in General, who unfortunately went out of business because of the financial difficulties during COVID. The organization was funded in 1981. It played a very crucial role to give first institution solo exhibitions for artists based in New York City, whether they're Americans or diasporic artists. In fact, Art in General had a very long-running focus on the former East and also South America as well. There are curators, institutional leaders that are very dedicated and committed to working with the so-called sort of underrepresented communities. So yeah, I'm very excited to take on this journey. I actually kind of feel like, I don't know, after working in this field as an exhibition maker for a very long time, I'm somehow really interested and curious about testing my ability fundraising. I think, I don't know, because also for TAF, I don't really need to fundraise, but for Art in General, it has always been a grassroots organization. Funding has always been an issue. So I really want to task myself to trying to see where I could go in terms of fundraising. And I think New York City is an amazing place for it if you're willing to really like dive deep into it. And I also think that fundraising is not just about getting the money, it's also about finding your community, because there is the community of supporters and patrons and people who are willing to actually help you realize a vision and help the artists produce their work. So I think that is I guess maybe the interesting part for me to fundraise and find this community particular and connect them with each other. So yeah, I think for TAF and Art in General, they have very different locales and historical timeline. I feel like I'm carrying two babies, but one is kind of a rebirth and the other is really like a newborn. And also, I think this idea of multiple identities, how do you implement it in your work, but also connect with everybody we work with, trying not to define and limit yourself in one thing, is something really influential to my work too.
Well, I mean, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for having enthusiasm about wanting to fundraise. And I'm sure you have a very strong network of support, but if you go crazy, you can call me too, because I started out running the Jumex Museum and Foundation, and so I didn't know what it was like to have to fundraise. But I would agree with you that fundraising is a kind of form of community building in some ways. I just think that maybe the question that we can talk about as an entire panel is how do we distinguish those two communities? Because there's the community that we want to serve, there's the community that gives us money, and then the community that can collaborate with us. So those are kind of different. But taking all of what you shared with us, thank you. How do you, I actually, without even knowing that you were going to be so enthusiastic about fundraising, I wrote the question for you to be, how do different funding models impact the ability of the type of institutions you've been with and the ones you're about to lead to foster genuine community engagement and sustain long-term relationships with the artists?
Yeah, I do feel like for both organizations, because we're so young and growing and changing, and the idea is to experiment and testing the water. I have some images that I forgot. But this is where we just launched the foundation in Singapore last month, and this is all of our speakers, visiting curators, and participants. We just captured this moment after a very intense day of workshop. I think for the funding models, as I mentioned, they're both very new, so it provides the space for us to experiment. And for TAF, I think the advantage of its sufficient funding is really, for me, also to think about focusing on providing the structure and the funding to commission artists' works. I think that's where maybe comes with a lot of difficulties when their new works wants to be made. There has always to be affiliated with an exhibition or in the context of the biennial. So we're really hoping also to provide the opportunity to work very closely with artists for that. And then secondly, of course, I think because of the disparity of economy, a certain amount of funding could go a really long way in certain places in the world. So it's also just to identify what is needed the most and what format of support is needed most in different region is another thing. And I think the disadvantage or the challenge of working with a a single funder is sometimes the personal preference or the personal agenda would get into the programming and all that. It's inevitable. But I would also argue it's not necessarily immune for large museums when you have a few patrons. They also kind of interfere a lot with the work. So I really felt like the key here is communication, and also with patience, sometimes you have to say the same thing really multiple times, even you already feel like you're ashamed of repeating yourself. So like I really think that's very important. And for art in general, again, like I have this, I don't know, how do you say, maybe nostalgia is not the right word, but I wanted to run also in a very classic kind of board, non-for-profit structure where there is a democratic processes of fundraising and participating in the programming, all that. So I don't want to get like a particular real funders, like a heavy funders, or someone would give like 50% of the funding. I wanted to fundraise in the way that the funding comes from multiple sources, and it somehow creates a mirror structure of TAF, and I want to see how they would turn out differently, and how, programming-wise, longevity-wise, and also the way we produce and collaborate with artists. So I really wanted to test the difference. So I don't know if I answer your question or have an answer, but this is the things that are work in progress.
The enthusiasm is awesome. We celebrate that. Muy bien hecho. So our last speaker, Miguel Lopez, is a curator and a writer, and I asked permission to say, and he is now assuming the position of chief curator at the Chopo Museum here in Mexico. And congratulations on that. I think you're going to be focusing on earlier projects of yours, but any thoughts that you will share about the community that you hope to create with your programming with Chopo will also be welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Abase. Thank you, Anaïs, for the invitation. Also, thank you, Anaïs, for bringing this amazing group of colleagues to the Museo del Chopo yesterday to visit the phenomenal exhibitions that we just opened last week. They are really great. If you didn't visit the museum yet, please run, because they are really, really, really special. And yes, I'm I'm here, I'm moving to Mexico City very soon. I'm really happy. I love this city very much. And Anaïs invited me to share a bit about some projects that I did in the past. Actually, she asked me to talk about Teoretica in Costa Rica and the Toronto Biennial that I co-curated last year in Canada, which is way too ambitious for a 10-minute presentation. So I'm going to focus on Teoretica in Costa Rica, and specifically one important change in the governance structure that happened, which I feel fits for this panel, institutions as communities, and actually is also related to this reflection around institutional changes and structures. So this is Teoretica. Teoretica is a non-profit visual arts organization in San Jose, Costa Rica, founded in 1999 by the artist and curator Virginia Perez Raton. The organization focuses on the art and social realities of Central America and the Caribbean. It develops exhibition, debates, educational programs, editorial projects, open grant calls, and a library and an archive dedicated to regional art. In 2015, I joined the institution as a chief curator. Teoretica is a small organization with only 12 staff members, often resulting in everyone taking on multiple roles. One of the most significant changes during my time there was the implementation of a model of collective governance. The small scale helped make such a transformation possible, as we felt we were operating as an art collective in many moments. The questions driving a change in the governance model focus on understanding ourselves, the institution's structure, and the community we belong to. This also involved examining day-to-day operations, the institution's power dynamics, and the curator's traditional role. This collective reflection began before my arrival, shortly after Inti Guerrero departed as artistic director in 2014. At that time, my colleagues, Daniela Morales, who was in charge of documentation and coordinating one of the two houses that Teoretica has, Lola Malabasi, who was in charge of education and also curating projects, and Paula Piedra, she's an architect and she was in charge of production, along with the executive director at that time, outlined the institution's programming for 6 months while waiting for my arrival as the chief curator. Even though I entered in a vertical structure with the executive director and the chief curator at the top, my presence did not halt the process. Instead, it helped to bring new questions to this collective imagination. Asking ourselves what makes an art institution relevant today led us to realize that the time and energy required to produce exhibitions barely leave time for self-reflection. We acknowledge the need to decelerate, create a space for thinking, and establish a different rhythm. As a result, our first decision was to slow down. But how? Seeing what other institutions were doing then significantly influenced that change. In July 2015, the raw material company in Senegal, Dakar, announced that it withdrew from public activities for a year to pause for reflection. They took a sabbatical to rethink their institutional work. Teoretica and Raw Material Company are part of Arts Collaboratory, an ecosystem of 25 organizations, mainly from the Global South, focused on art practices and social change. A document prepared collectively by Arts Collaboratory introduced a number of tools and concepts to work in opposition to the normalization of neoliberal values within art institutions. One of those concepts was time strike, which was not a slogan, but a mechanism to change our relationship with work. In their words, it is a call for a strike against the current use of time, deadline after deadline, being busy, feeling anxious and overwhelmed, which harms our well-being and interpersonal relations. By the second half of 2016, the concept of a time strike took from Arts Collaboratory Common Language had started to gain traction as a tool for us at Theoretica to pause. By the end of that year, after many conversations between us and the whole team, we decided to go on what we called exhibition strike. We left the galleries empty in 2017 and repurposed them as workspaces to study the institution and propose a different form of articulation. We discussed alternatives for institutional paradigm shifts and a model of shared governance. I must admit that the beginning of the exhibition strike prompted to explore a set of challenging self-inquiries about my practice. Was a curator still necessary in an institution that no longer held exhibitions? Was I dispensable? If I was hired to make exhibitions and that task was withdrawn, did it imply that I had failed in fulfilling my assigned duties? Should I continue within the institution or step aside? Even when we were exploring alternative definition of curating, it is revealing how the conventional compartmentalization of the practice based on individual exceptionalisms haunts our imaginations. The decision to withdraw from having more exhibitions was received with disappointment locally. However, the exhibition strike allowed us to spend more time together as a group, cooking, walking, sharing personal experiences, gaining a deeper understanding of one another, and discovering more effective ways to handle disagreements. The desire to destabilize the division between those who conceptualize and those who administer the conceptualization within the institution was channeled into creating a space where anyone from the staff of Theoretica could run a project with the support and accompaniment of others. The outcome of the exhibition strike and the many months of studying the institution and ourselves led to a proposal of collective leadership to the administrative board of Theoretica. They granted us a 6-month trial period, and in January 2018, the five co-directors, Lola Malabasi, Daniela Morales, Paula Piedra, Dominique Raton, and me, and this is a picture of the announcement, were publicly announced as the collective direction. I left the institution in December 2020 after 3 years of collective direction, but this collective directorship is still active and run by 3 members of our initial group. The experience left us with many questions, which are increasingly present when considering curatorial work and the role of institutions. How to imagine dynamics of co-responsibility in institutional governance? What does it mean to run an institution? How could questioning individual authorship allow us to embrace interdependence within art institutions? And I'm wrapping up, and I wanted to close with this image of the first 4 books of a series published by Theoretica during that time. Upon my arrival as chief curator, one big challenge I had to face was defining a program in a context I had not yet had the time to get to know in depth. I felt like walking around with a torch in the dark for the first few months. I thought I needed to get close to the people who advance critical reflection around the region. So one first decision was to reactivate Theoretica's printed publication program, to learn from what had happened before. I always say that making books is a way of studying a context. This is the bilingual series Escrituras Locales, Posiciones Críticas de América Central, el Caribe y sus diásporas, Local Writings, Critical Positions from Central America, the Caribbean and its diasporas, published between 2021, which collected writings by curators, critics, and artists who play a key role in changing the conditions for thinking and creating art. The first 4 books that you see here were dedicated to Tamara Diaz Bringas from Costa Rica, Cuba, Adrienne Samos from Panama, Rosina Casali from Guatemala, and Raúl Quintanilla from Nicaragua. The fifth book collected the writings by Barbadian artist and curator Annalie Davis, and the sixth was dedicated to Virginia Perez Raton, founder of Theoretica. And this series was interrupted by the pandemic, and I'm finishing now. So I just wanted to say that creating these books not only helped me visualize alternative origins for the debates surrounding the contemporary and foster conversations about it, but also deepened my understanding of how a prior generation of Central American and Caribbean cultural workers examined the relationship between art production and social transformation, encouraging us to embrace unpredictability when engaging with and working within art institutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You posed a lot of questions in your presentation. So I was going to ask you about radical approaches, but maybe you can, I'll switch and ask, while you were asking all these questions, doing the job, how did that foster what you think your role is as you go into your new position?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I think what happened in Theoretica is quite unique. I mean, the small scale of the institution helped us a lot in terms that we were, in a way, an art collective. I mean, we had this kind of assembly model of, like discussion and making decision processes. And I think the collective governance, in a very organic way, emerged from the conversation within the community, understanding that it was important to raise questions around what it means to lead an institutions, because we felt that the few institutions that were at that time had some kind of rigid parameters of action. So I think in that sense, each context informs what curators or museum directors or cultural workers in different ways do. So I don't think it is possible to translate this experience easily into another context or into any other organization. But what I really learned is that we need to invent our tools, even our languages. This is something that was really beautiful about the collective directorship, is that as we saw Ars Collaboratoria as a partner to discuss with ourselves, we started to create a vocabulary, to understand what was happening at the institution, even how to name our disagreements, how to name the conflicts, even the moments when we were feeling super tired or anxious or upset. So I think we started to create these kind of tools, quite funny in a way, to understand what is happening. So I really learned that, and also to listen, which I think is also really important, and then to be creative in terms of how to approach what we do as curator, which is really amazing, because at some point I think this kind of change of the governance structure, I didn't curate exhibitions anymore, so I was really developing other activities, and my role as curator was not an exhibition maker solely, but more like creating connections, which is something that we do all the time, right? And even accompanying other people's processes. We were more focused on public programs, for example, and education. And I would say that I'm really eager to see what is going to happen here. I cannot anticipate, but I'm pretty sure that the interaction and even the conversation and the encounters with local actors will definitely inform what is going to happen at the museum, yes.
Thank you. I think I would say that my last 15 years of experience, being an immigrant pretty much everywhere I've been, and being the other, what I learned running the institutions was the building of the community is twofold: the inside community and the outside community. And I would advocate and ask of my colleagues to remember mentoring. This has been a big part of me because I came from politics and not from art history, so I didn't belong to a prestigious art history program where I had other colleagues, or I hadn't, and so the support network wasn't as available. So mentoring, I think when you say building tools, I would hope that one of those tools is us investing in colleagues, regardless of their age, because people, it's not an age-dependent thing. So I don't know if I want to thank you all because you were all perfect in your timing, which is rare. That is brilliant. I don't know if there's any questions. I did write a final question so that maybe we spoke as 5 people. But is there a question beforehand from anyone? The panels have been so good. No, oh, there is a question. Funds private or public for
Theoretica?
Yeah, Theoretica.
It's a private institution. Basically, the founding is an endowment of the family. The founder, Virginia Perez Raton, came from a very wealthy family. So basically, when she died in 2010, I think her daughter wanted to, and the whole family wanted to keep Virginia's memory alive, so they created this endowment. So the institution is having private funding, which helps a lot in terms of, giving us a lot of freedom in experimenting with many things. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe as a closing, I would ask you all, how do you define community within the institutional context? Kind of brief. And how can institutions remain open, flexible, and accountable to the evolving, intersectional, and sometimes contradictory needs of the communities that engage with it? So maybe we'll start with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a very difficult question. I guess the first thing...
You can preview, and then...
I think for me, again, I really drawn to this idea of shifting and change and evolving. And I think community is not a defined thing. Even we might feel that we belong to a certain place. In fact, when I was thinking about what I was going to say today, I thought a lot about this concept, or in a more philosophical term, not in a day-to-day term, this idea of home and homelessness, homeland, and all these. Of course, it's a very loaded philosophical term explored by many European philosophers. But for me, the most recent intriguing text I read was from a Hong Kong philosopher, Yue Kui, his new book called Post-Europe, where he had restudied this concept of homeland and homelessness to really think about the challenges we're facing from the outright wing, and in terms of our obsession of this homeland. But certainly, as I said, it's a very loaded term when we think about all the political struggle today. But I also wanted to kind of maybe use that as an evocative thing to think about community and the sense of belonging, and how can we both problematize it, challenge it, but also look for different ways of engagement.
Yes, big question. Yeah, I think you said permeable, right? How to keep it permeable. I think it is important. I would say to as Xiao Yu mentioned it, this reflection that is related to the outside and as well to the inside of the institution. I mean, this reflection around Theoretica was really trying to give a space to look at us, to see how are we functioning, but also understanding better what the community expected, from Theoretica, from us. So I think the moment when we actually stop organizing exhibitions, we receive a lot of comments. So we actually listen and we understand what our community needed. Of course, there are many different, many different needs. I am now joining a really amazing new project led by Solenaro, the new director of the Museo del Chopo, who is actually developing really important transformation on the outside and in the inside as well. And I think that is really special because, of course, the building needs to be welcoming, right? The building really needs to invite you to be there. And I wanted to say something else and I forgot. But yeah, I think this kind of, to think about the relationship between the outside and the inside, I think is really important in terms of thinking how an institution is building a community. Yes.
Yeah, well, in the last 10 plus years, I've worked with 2 different models of community or audience building. The first one is nomadic, where you go to various locations around the world and you try to find an audience there. And maybe we were too ambitious in the early years, and honestly, you cannot have an audience everywhere in Asia, Europe, North and South America. So we toned that back, and like I think the answer is to also have realistic expectations and kind of build deeper, closer ties with a smaller community. And the other part of it is like if you have a permanent home and you are building an audience there, like when we started renovating that ruin of a submarine factory, that formerly closed off area actually had an existing community there of sailors and boaters and swimmers, and it was fascinating. So they were like, who are you? So we were definitely newcomers there. And these ruins were used, before the roads were built there, for underground parties, for like DJs from London and Taiwan. So we were already coming into something, growing and building. And ultimately, it's about giving and receiving. And you have to really have a sixth sense about it, or just really listen and build on that. Like, what are you coming with? And, what can you offer? And what do you expect in return? It's like a plant.
I think it kind of reflecting to kind of myself daily question when every day I think about like my curatorial facing community. And a lot of time I actually ask myself, or even my colleagues, like, how do we actually be able to measure this kind of level of intimacy with the body of community we're working with? Because earlier when Xiaoyu would talk about this fundraising idea, and it kind of involved with many different body of the people you work with, from patron, from artists, from collaborators, and then from audience. And for me, it's even involved with the interns. And in my past, 7 years ago, before Vernacular, I was work as also independent organization, every day struggling with fundraising, and we kind of always sending the email to our lovers, which is from the patron to the interns. And this kind of like, that reminding me about the way of aware your community. Sometimes it could actually be more physical phenomena, but maybe it's something that kind of intimacy. But intimacy is very abstract. Somehow it also depends on where you position in terms of your institutional landscape, in terms of your curator character. And also, I experience as an institutional curator, I know as an independent curator, you probably easily to get into the intimacy. And it's not it also easily to escape to be institutionalized. And institutionalized is something I also kind of daily reminding myself, like if one day vernaculars has to be institutionalized to be able to maintain this kind of working model and functional relationship with community. Maybe it lost something, but it wins something. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anaïs. Thank you, Salón Acme and Material. Thank you to all of you. Gracias.
Maybe please don't move, but it's too late. Please stay sit. I will just make a few remarks and then we will be able to continue. But first of all, thank you to all of you. Thank you, Abasemir Valise. Thank you, Xiao Yuang. Thank you, Miguel Lopez. Thank you, Karen Lanzo. Thank you, Zhe Yingpeng, who already left us. And I just want to thank you as well, all of you, for staying, coming, and joining us today. And I just want to maybe thumb up what I think few words, maybe the key idea of the day. I think maybe what we learned today that we don't work with institution or with representation, but we work with people. And this is with these people that surround us, such as artists, thinkers, colleagues, our mentors as well. This is with these people that we can imagine a new way of working with contemporary art and a new way of creating a new path for institution and also a new way of collaborating. And also I think that speaking about affect today and the place of affect in the art world and in our practices come from, I think, a place of instability. Maybe we are also exactly in a place of instability of institution, instability of funding, instability of politics and government, economy, ecology, but focusing on the affect and how we can build community and value these affect and the people around us, I think allowed us to escape fatalism or depression maybe, and to focus on what we can build for the futures and what do we have in common and what are our purpose to create new things, to continue creating. And I think maybe the thing that all of you share with us today was first the necessity of mutualizing resources, friends, thought, a new way of thinking, solution. And also, I think all of you maybe in a way spoke about art as a way of creating solution and repairs, and maybe a way of repairing a relationship, repairing relationship to the world, repairing to relationship to others, to our colleagues, to the world we are living in it. And I think it's a beautiful way to think about art as a solution and as a hope in a way. Thank you so much to everyone. And I hope to see you soon. And thank you for the Tamayo Museum. I wanted to say this also, that the symposium was a methodology. It was not only a theme. The symposium was made with a very large community of people. And so all the speakers you've seen today who participated, who joined us, I think are part of, in a way, also, I have to confess, are part of my community, are part of our community, so many people knew each other on the day-to-day basis. And I hope this community of the present is now also building community of the futures after the symposium. And I want to thank all the people who worked on this symposium. I want to thank Magali Ariola, Lena. I want to thank all the team of the Tamayo, Jacobo. I want to thank Anaïs, Edouard, all the person, I don't remember the name, I'm really sorry. I don't have no battery right now. I want to thank all the team from Material, Adrian, Carolina, Marcos, Anna, Brett, I don't know, everyone, and also Amparo, and all the University of Monterrey, and all the people who collaborated with us and who made this possible. Thank you. This is, everything is belonging to you. Thank you so much. And now we can just close the whole presentation with the video of the University of Monterrey, who would join us all day today. I think the best collaborators and also audience, in a way.